Hi everybody, how are you? Enjoying MIX? Cool. So my name is Sumit. I'm a program manager in the interoperability team. I have here with me Craig Kiraman. Craig, you want to stand up and say hi? I'll be running through most of the presentation. Craig's going to be around to answer any business questions you may have about Windows Azure. So we're going to jump in right away. A little bit of expectation setting. I can understand when we talk about PHP and Windows Azure, you may have a lot of questions about what is Windows Azure? Why should I put my PHP application on Windows Azure? We're not going to answer those today. This talk is mostly about if you have decided you want to move your PHP application to Windows Azure, how are you going to do that? How are you going to make it happen? It's a how-to talk. That said, if you don't know much about Windows Azure or why you should use it, please stay in the room if you want to learn how to do it. We don't want to lose you. I will give a 90-second introduction to Windows Azure, and then you can learn how to develop your applications on Windows Azure with PHP, and then go back later and get the big picture. So there's a lot of different talks. I don't know if you went to Steve Marks's talk earlier yesterday, or a lot of online resources as well. You can catch up on the what it is, why should I do it later. Today we're going to focus on how to. Agenda is really, really simple. We'll start with a quick pitch on what Windows Azure is. And then just about, I have my PHP application. How do I get it up and running on Windows Azure? And then talk about some other PHP tools and SDKs that I'm not going to get a chance to show today. But they exist, and it's a large surface area, so I'm going to focus on some things today and then point you to the rest later. And then we'll open up if you have any questions. That said, you're welcome to ask questions as we go along, and I'll try my best to answer them as we go through. So with that, what is Windows Azure? Simple answer. It is an operating system in the cloud. What do we mean by that? Think of several data centers around the world, each data center with multiple thousands of containers, each container with hundreds and hundreds of racks, server racks, and all of this carved up into virtual machines. You give us your code, your PHP code in this case, and we run it in our cloud. That's a level of detail I'm going to go into about Windows Azure. So, that sounds great, does it? I guess you're in the room, so it should sound great to you. So how do I do this? This talk is going to be mostly about demos. I'm going to show you how to do this. That's pretty much all I'm going to do is show you one demo after another. I put this up. I'm not going to drain this, but I put this up so you know you kind of have the bill of materials of what I'm using in my demos. I'll point out the software that I use as I go along. But we will make the code for this available in a blog post. So if you go back into the, this is hard, to this blogs.msdn.com/interoperability. Watch that space. We will post, I didn't just have time to put together everything before the talk, but I will make all the code that I'm going to show available for you for download. And then that list of software will be helpful. Okay. So with that, let's step right into building our first PHP application on Windows Azure. I'm going to switch to the demo machine. What I have here is Eclipse. This is the Eclipse IDE. It's the Galileo version of Eclipse with PHP developer tools installed. And that's your starting point. There's one other dependency that you need to be aware of. You need to download the Windows Azure SDK. The Windows Azure SDK is different than the Visual Studio tools for Windows Azure. The Visual Studio tools include the Windows Azure SDK. And if you go to azure.com and go to the Get Tools, it'll point you to get to the Visual Studio one. You do not need Visual Studio for any of the demos I'm going to show today. So you just need the Windows Azure SDK. Just scroll down the page and you will find it. And that's all you need. You need the Windows Azure SDK, Eclipse with PDD installed. That's the baseline. Once you have that, you can go to Help, Install New Software, and let's see. I don't have it here, so let me add it real quick. I'm just going to call it Windows Azure for Eclipse. You go to www.windowsazureforE.org/update. Okay, it says it's duplicate because I probably already have it in my list here. Okay, there you go. So I have it here. So once you select that, you're going to see Windows Azure. It has a bunch of dependencies. You want to get them all down. I'm not going to click Next and Finish because I already have it installed, but that's what you would do. You would click Next, you'll do a check, and you say Finish, and it will install the Windows Azure plugin for Eclipse right inside here, and you're good to do development inside Eclipse. Okay, so once I have that, what do I get? If you look up here, I have a Windows Azure toolbar button. And here I have, basically a bunch of different options. Most of them are grayed out. There is a Windows Azure Storage Explorer that's built right in that you can use to browse through your Windows Azure blobs and table stores and queues. That's built in right here. I'm not going to go through that, but if you know what Windows Azure blobs and tables and queues is, you are able to manipulate them right here inside the IDE. What I'm going to do is create a new project. I'm going to choose the Windows Azure Web Project. And if you notice here, let's just call it something PHP Azure. Okay. If you notice, there are a bunch of data storage options. If you want to use SQL Azure, or you want to use Windows Azure Storage, or you want to use both of them, you can select one of these options here. What this will do is it will include the dependencies you need to support those, like for SQL Azure, you need the PHP SQL Server driver, and it'll get that in your bundle for your project. Or it'll basically get the PHP SDK for Windows Azure if you're doing Windows Azure Storage. I'm not going to use them here. I'm just going to go with a simple Hello World type program for right now. But if you do choose those options, you also get sample code that shows you how to use it. So how to manipulate the blob container, how to make a connection to SQL Azure. It comes with some sample code right out of the box. You can delete those files if you don't need them, but it'll drop those in. I'm just going to choose a simple project with none of that. And if you notice here, I got two projects. The PHP Azure web role is really your PHP web project for Windows Azure. And the PHP Azure project that's the top one here is really, think about it as a wrapper for your Windows Azure project. And this contains the configuration file and metadata that you need for your wrapper, for your cloud project itself, not your web application itself. So in here, in the web application, I have index and web.config. If I bring up my index, it basically says, it's a hello world. It prints out PHP info. So I'm going to change that slightly. Let's just call it PHP at MIX, and I'm going to replace PHP info at sort right. Let's do something more original like hello PHP developers, if I can learn to type. Okay, so that's it. The other thing you'll notice is the configuration file here, as I just talked about. This is where you would put in, oops, didn't mean to do that. That's not me, that's Eclipse. I have to remember to say open with text editor, because otherwise it uses the default program, in which case this happens to be Visual Studio for me. So here's where you set up, how many instances do you want of your web front end? I want, 3 instances or whatever, and you specify that here. This is also where you specify your, connection strings or other stuff that you want to change after you deployed your application to the cloud. Okay? So I'm just going to go run this application right here. I say run as, I need to actually select the file. And I say, I want to run this as a PHP Windows Azure application. So you see this as an option because I have the PHP tool for Windows Azure installed. Okay, it's been modified. I want to save it. Yes. And while it's trying to build that, what is actually happening here is that this is trying to run this application in a simulated Windows Azure environment. So we have the cloud, but we also have the scaled down version that runs on your local machine. It's called the development fabric, and that's what this application is going to run under locally here. that comes with the Windows Azure SDK. If you have the Windows Azure SDK, I have that installed here. So here I get my application, and it's running in my local version of my cloud right on my box here. One other thing to note here is that in order for me to deploy PHP, what is happening is the entire PHP runtime is being bundled along with my application. And the way it works is I'm basically using the ability to run native code in Windows Azure, and we take the entire bundle, Xcopy it, and then use that in the deployed application. So all of that is I just want to point that out. It's not obvious because the Eclipse tooling today kind of hides that from you. We're planning to make that more transparent, but in this current build, it kind of hides that from you. So I want you to call that out. Once I've done that, I can go ahead and actually deploy it to the cloud. And if you've seen the Visual Studio experience, this is very, very similar. You go Windows Azure, and you can say publish application to the Windows Azure portal list. In this case, it will package this up into a cloud package and then open up my web browser. Since I already have my web browser open, I'm just going to say just package the application. And it says it needs to clean up the development fabric. So I say OK to that. And in just a little bit, I should see my application bundled. And it should come up with basically two files. One is a CS package file, which is this one. Let me make this window a little bit bigger so you can see. I don't know if you can see that or not. This is the service package file, and then there's the other configuration file. And these are two files I need to upload. So I don't know how many of you have seen this portal before? Quite a few of you. I'm going to just not go through the entire process, but I'll just quickly show you what you need to do. You have two slots. You have a production slot and you have a staging slot. You can upload to any one, and then you can swap them out as you can swap between production and staging if you need to. So you get two slots with your solution. And in this particular case, let's say I already have this application deployed in production, but I'm going to show you what it is like to deploy. If you click deploy, and you get, upload your package. So you can go and point to this folder here and upload the PHP Azure package, or the configuration setting. You browse to both of them. You say you want to upload. You click deploy, and there it goes. But I already have this running on the cloud. So it's called hellomix.cloudapp.net. So that's simple. Okay, so we got our Hello World application working. What next? I have a real-world application. I'm sure you all have real-world PHP applications too. How are we going to deal with them? So let me go show you an example of that. I'm going to switch back to Eclipse. Okay, so this one is that. Okay, so here I have a very simple application. It's a straight PHP application at this point. It's not an Azure application, and it's just really just a catalog for browsing products. Very simple. It's running with PHP and MySQL in the backend, and this is a very common scenario where you have one application bundled with one MySQL database. It's kind of what we call the typical scenario for small web applications for PHP. So as you're doing this, you see, what I have open here is my app.ini file. It's a simple application. It has a local host. That's where my database is running. It's the database name is booksdb, and I have my username and password. I won't do it in clear text like this, but that's just for an example. Okay. And I basically have some operations to. I want to pay attention to this, to the way it's configured right now. I'm reading the configuration file and then setting up my database name, host name, and then doing basically connecting to the database. And then I have all the CRUD operations: insert, delete, query, so forth. Okay. Nothing about Azure right now, so I'm just going to run this as a PHP web page. That's my starting point. Okay, I can go. I can browse my catalog. I don't have a whole lot of items. I have 3 books. Great, simple enough. Okay, now how do I take this and move it to Azure? All I do is right-click on my project, go to Windows Azure, and say Convert to Windows Azure PHP project. And you can choose what storage options you want. So again, just like when you create a new project, I had a bunch of options. Here too, I have a bunch of options. I am going to migrate this project over to SQL Azure later, so let me say select SQL Azure. I keep the same project name, and it finishes doing that. And now you see I have my cloud project and I have my web role, so it's there already. I'm going to run this in my dev fabric now. So let's see how that goes. I run it as a Windows Azure web page this time. And it takes a little bit of time. Remember, it's taking all your PHP, it's bundling all of that up into a cloud package. And it should come up in any minute now. Just give it another couple of seconds. It should be here. While it's doing that, actually, I can show. There you go. So I see my application went to the start page again. I go click browsing. It's running. So now what would happen if I were to take this application and run it in the cloud? Would it just work? Anybody wants to take a guess? Would it just work? Actually, it won't. Why? I got my web application running in the cloud, but what about the database? I need to move my MySQL database to the cloud as well. Right? Right now, the application is running in the development fabric, but it's using my local instance of MySQL. I need to bundle that up as well. Before we go do that, I need to explain a couple things. So we're going to go switch back to the slide. Okay. So it turns out that I showed you that you could set up the number of web instances you want and so forth. That's actually called a web role. A web role is not necessarily a web server. It is, but when in Windows Azure, when you deploy a web role, it's a web application running in IIS. So if you were to take your PHP application, run it, there are ways to run it as with Apache or with Tomcat, and bundle it separately. You don't necessarily need a web role, but with our tooling and with Windows Azure by default, when you create a web application, it's a web role hosted in IIS. Turns out that that's how our PHP web application was running. But you also need a worker role where you could run your database in. So worker role is basically, think of it as non-IIS. If you're familiar with the Windows world, the closest thing is a Windows service. But think about it as a separate piece of code that you still can expose internal and external endpoints to it, and you can still do whatever you want. It's just not on the front end. And so that's basically it. So what I would like to do is run MySQL in a worker role. And at this point, every instance of any role or every instance of every role gives you a separate virtual machine. So it's running a separate virtual machine, but it's in the same solution. This is really what I want. So how do I make this happen? I have to copy my MySQL to a worker role subdirectory, and I'll show you how you can do that. Then when you run your VM or your instance in the cloud, you get a read-write folder where that's not where things are copied to by default, but that's where you want MySQL to be running. So you need to copy it over to a writable folder. And then you need to kind of discover what port and IP address the MySQL worker role is running, so your application, your web application can then bind to it and start using it. You could take the worker role and just put an external endpoint on it, but there's no firewall or anything at that point that we offer, so you would have to mitigate that and be responsible for how you provide access to it. We would really recommend that if you have one PHP, one database, you can bundle it like this. But here's what I also need to tell you, that in our Eclipse tooling today, we don't have the ability to create worker roles. It's coming. We have it on our roadmap. It's not there today. So throughout this talk, you'll see I'll try to give you very practical examples of very practical advice about how to get your stuff running. The story can be improved in some cases, and we are working on it. But my goal is so when you go away from here, you are able to do this yourself. So what do I have to do? Oops, the wrong one. Okay. There are a couple of solution accelerators out there. The first one actually is enough, the MySQL accelerator for PHP. And there was a talk that Tushar Shanbag and Mohit Srivastav did at PDC 09. And they have, that's a link to the video. You can go watch that, and it walks in a lot of detail about how to set this up. You do not need Visual Studio for this piece either. You can do it completely from the command line. So I won't go through everything that you have to do, but I will step out of Eclipse for just a minute and show you how you can get your PHP plus MySQL app running in Azure. So let's switch back to the demo box. Okay, so here I actually made a copy of the MySQL accelerator. You download it, you extract it, it creates a folder, and let me do a quick directory on this. Are you able to see? You want me to increase the font a little bit? Can everybody in the room see this? Okay. Okay. Let me bump up the font just a little bit. So that's too bad. Doesn't look good. I should have played with this before. Go back to it. I guess you can see it. If you can, let me know. Raise your hand if you can't. Okay, so basically, there are three files here. There's the build me. That's interesting. Then there's a pack me, and there's a run me. So it's pack me, run me, and build me. Build me will simply build the solution, and pack me will pack it up as a cloud package, and run me will run it in the cloud, or run it in the dev fabric, actually, and then you can just deploy it to the cloud. But this is MySQL. So how do you get your web role that you created in Eclipse into your solution? The way you do it is basically if you look in here, I'm going to go and actually bring this up in Windows Explorer. This application already has a web role called the PHP MyAdmin web role. So I cheated a little bit and said, hey, I already have a PHP web role for PHP MyAdmin. I can just drop my application code in the same web role. You could create a separate web role as well. It's just the same thing. You would be running another instance if you do that. And I basically drop my bookstore right in here, and then I can run build me, and it creates me a package. There are a couple gotchas that you need to be aware of. One, the code that you need to dynamically discover your IP address and bind your application to it is missing from the solution accelerator that you downloaded. So the way you make that work is, I know it's a little kludgy. Like I said, we'll make this better with the Eclipse tooling very soon, hopefully. But the way you do it is you go to your web role and you drop in two files, a global and global asx.cs. It is a C# file, but you don't need to do anything. You just drop this in. All this file contains is it contains the glue code to iterate through all the roles that are running and ask them what port are you at and what IP address are you at. And it populates a global variable with that. That's all it does. And then the change that you need to make in your application is the following. You need to go into the DB util. I'll just bring this up in WordPad real quick. And remember how I was getting in my PHP application, I was doing a config, read the config from app.ini and get my database name and all that stuff from there. Now you just get it from getenv. This is already enabled by, you don't need to worry about how, this will just work as it is. And you get the master host and master port. And then you set up your database accordingly. So once that's done, you can basically run the application in the cloud. Before I go on, I have to say that when you get the MySQL solution accelerator, if you're going to do this, just realize that it's built for like the big case where you have one master SQL database, you have two slaves, you're doing replication, you have a separate process that's the instance monitor that monitors the instances, you have another process that monitors the worker roles. and you have a PHP MyAdmin role. So with all of these roles, it's a pretty big solution. One limitation you have in Azure in production is that a couple limitations. One, you cannot have more than 5 roles in one solution. 2, you cannot have more than 5 endpoints. So I had to scale that MySQL Accelerator solution down and remove, basically just literally delete the roles I don't want. Again, I will have this code in a blog post, so you will be able to download and use it as it is. So with that said, let's take a look quickly at once I deploy it. And basically, I have, if I go back to the solution, when I run the build me, it creates the service package and service configuration, and I just upload that, and it runs on the cloud. One little minor detail I forgot to mention. When you get the solution accelerator and try to do the build me, it's going to ask you for a few different things. So let me just run the build me on my clean copy here so you can see that. It asks me where my MySQL binary is. So we are not allowed to redistribute MySQL or PHP or PHP MyAdmin. So you have to get those yourself. You download them. You get the X-copyable version of MySQL, not the MSI. And you get PHP and you get your PHP MyAdmin, and you just put them wherever on your disk and just tell us the path here, and the accelerator will put them in the right place. OK. I'm not going to do that. It's going to take a few minutes to do that. So just quickly switching back to the running version of this. So I have MIX10 MySQL cloud app. So this is now running in the cloud with a MySQL backend. And if the demo gods are not against me today, it should just work. OK, great. So that's all good. OK, that out of the way, let's move on back to the slide deck. OK. So we just went through that demo. So you saw how you could run MySQL with PHP together bundled in the cloud. It's possible to do that. My goal really was to make sure you understand it's possible. If you choose to do that, you can do that. I would encourage you, however, to consider migrating to SQL Azure for the following reasons. One, the database scales up or scales down if needed based on your demand. So you can, with very little SQL code, you can tell it to scale up or scale down. The bigger thing to me is that you don't have to manage your database. You're not responsible for the installs. We manage it. We apply the patches. We make sure it's always running. We make sure it's replicated. And you have a relational database basically as a service. And then we provide the fault tolerance as well. And then the ease with which you can provision and create new databases is amazing. So I know we have some size limitations, 1 gig, 10 gig, more. But but you can have multiple instances of your database. So I would really encourage you to think about migrating to SQL Azure and not just taking the MySQL PHP bundle like I just showed you. But it is possible to do the former if you choose to. OK, so I'm not going to go into too much detail about SQL Azure itself. I'm going to show you how you can get your MySQL application converted to SQL Azure and run through it that way. There is a talk tomorrow that David Robinson is doing on SQL Azure. Please attend that if you are interested in learning more about SQL Azure in depth. So the way we're going to go migrate our SQL Server database to SQL Azure is using the SQL Server Migration Assist tool for MySQL CTP v1. That's a mouthful, right? Basically, it's a tool that takes MySQL and MySQL schema and data and moves it over to either SQL Server or SQL Azure, depending on what you choose. It's in CTP 1. I cannot make any promises as to what errors you might encounter and so forth. So take it understanding that it's CTP code. For my very simple bookstore, I had no problem migrating it over to SQL Azure. So I'm going to show you how I did that. So let's take a look at that. Back to demo. All right. So this is the tool. So I create a new project, and then I get to connect to MySQL. And I'm just going to connect as root for right now. OK. So this is my local SQL. I select my books DB. I connect to SQL Azure. And here I have my information pre-populated. It's asking me for a database. I didn't actually create a database to migrate. So let me go do that. Before we can do this, we need to go create a database in SQL Azure. Only takes a minute. If the portal works, which I hope it will. Okay, create database. I specify create database, let's say MIX10. I choose 1 gig. There you go, I have my database created. It's that simple. So my MIX10 database is created. It's a 0 bytes in size right now. And the other thing to be aware of is the firewall settings. I do need to enable I need to enable my client to be able to connect to this application. I need to open up, either an IP address or a range of IP addresses, which I already did. I think I did. So we'll see. If it doesn't work, we'll maybe come back to it. Okay, so now that I have MIX10, I'm just going to change that mix test to MIX10 now. And I give it my username and my password. Okay. Oops. Okay, let's try that again. Is it wrong? It's MIX10, not MIX10. Okay. Thank you. Okay, let's try that again. Okay, so this time I do have a connection. So again, I go drill down and I select my MIX10 database. So the first thing I'm going to do is, so you can actually, by the way, you can look at the schema mapping, the type mappings, character set mappings, all of those things are right here in the tool. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select books DB and say I want to convert schema. Okay, so it converted the schema without any errors. So one little thing you need to be aware of, just a usability thing. When you do the schema, it doesn't actually apply to the target database. You actually have to go synchronize with the database to do that. So the way you do it is you select your target database and you say synchronize with database. Okay, so one thing I should have done, which I didn't, is I needed to change the target schema from BooksDB to BooksDB to just DBO, so I don't have to specify BooksDB in all of my queries. I should have done that. But anyway, so you see at this point, if I go and look here, the synchronization is done, and at that point I can go select my target database again and say I want to migrate the data. So I have to specify my password again, which is a pain. And again. Oh, so now I changed that to DBO, but I didn't actually do a sync on this. So it kind of screwed it up. Okay, let's do this again real quick. Promise won't take much time. Okay, I want to save this. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to go back and create another one here real quick. Go to databases, create database, MIX10 demo. Okay. Okay. Select that. This time I'm going to go modify my target schema to DBO. Okay. So I have the two things selected right there. I go convert schema. Synchronize with database. Okay. And then I select it again and I migrate the data. Okay, so it says 3 rows were migrated. So now I should, if everything turns out right, I should be able to use this in my application. So what I have done is I have converted this application to a Windows Azure application, to a SQL Azure application, sorry, and I have it right here. So the few things I had to change, I'll show it to you running, but I want to walk through the changes I made. Very few changes. Of course, it depends on how your source application uses MySQL. In this case, the mapping was relatively simple because I was a little structured to begin with. But depending on how you're using MySQL, you may have to map things a little differently. But it's really a one-to-one mapping for the most part. So first thing I do is I moved my configuration out to the service configuration of CSFG. So it's no longer in app.ini. It's moved it to a separate configuration file. And here, basically, I have my databases. So I'm just going to change that to MIX10 demo because it's not MIX10 test anymore. And just a couple other things here. That actually nothing else matters. It's just really just this piece. Then the other change I had to make was in dbutil, where this is the place where I was doing my CRUD operations. So instead of reading the config and getting it from the app.config, I do Azure_get_config. So this basically gets the configuration from the Azure configuration. If you were to try to do this yourself outside of Eclipse, outside of the stooling, you just remember that to get to the Azure configuration, you need a PHP extension that we bundle with the tool. It's called php_azure.dll. But you need that PHP extension that's the glue between the native configuration code and PHP. So you need that. But if you have that, you should be able to use Azure get config. And then this connection string changes, just the syntax is different. With MySQL, you connect and you select a database. Here it's all in one string. The query syntax changes using SQL Server query. Now you do need the SQL Server driver for PHP enabled to be able to do this. And all of that is bundled with the tool. So you don't, if you chose when you were creating the Windows Azure product, which use SQL Azure, and as long as you did that, you're good. And just really a couple minor changes on the fetch. With the syntax is different, but there's nothing else. So with that, I should be able to take this application and run it. Let's make my home page, and I want to run it as a Windows Azure application. So what is happening now is that my application is going to run in the development fabric, but it's connecting out to my database in the cloud. Make sense? So once that finishes, I should be able to see it running against the database that we just migrated over. Let's give it another couple of seconds here. Okay, so I have my main page up. The real test is if it can go to a database. There you go. So my 3 rows still appear. And by the way, just to make sure that we are going against SQL Azure, let's go ahead and change. Let's change the password. Change something so we know it's not. Let's try it again one more time. And this time it should fail. You just select a specific file before I go run as. And I run it as Windows Azure Web Project. Okay, so it's going to do the same thing again, and we'll hopefully see it running in Windows Azure very shortly. I expect to get a database error this time. Okay, go. Okay, so it's supposed to go to this page. I'm not making a database connection yet. There you go. So now it tells me that, I didn't have the right credentials, whatever. So, okay, so far so good. I have this thing deployed on Windows Azure as well. It's called MIX10. This is running against the Cloud SQL Azure database, and I see the same data there too. Okay, very good. Of course, this is actually not using it's using MIX10, just in the interest of full disclosure, it's using MIX10 test database, not the MIX10 demo that we just created, but it's the same deal. Okay, so that's that. Let's move back to the slide deck. Did I lose my clicker? I lost it somewhere, right there. Okay. This is what I've been waiting for. Is there anybody in this room who doesn't want to use Eclipse but rather do this from the command line? Nobody? Everybody who uses Eclipse? No? See? A lot of us would not want to use an IDE. A lot of us don't use an IDE when we're doing PHP development. We like to use, I don't know, Komodo Edit or Notepad or VI, whatever that is. So we thought we could make we heard this feedback loud and clear when we put out the Eclipse tools. So what we went ahead and did was make the same experience available to you from a command line. So you can do everything I was just talking about from Eclipse. You can do that from the command line using the command line tools for PHP. We just released the CTP as of right now. And you can go to the CodePlex site and download the command line tool. The way the command line tool works is you tell us what PHP core you want to use. So again, and let me make it very clear. In the Eclipse tool today, we don't let you choose which PHP runtime you use. We bundle one. You can go after the fact and hack it and change it, but it's not very, very clear out of the box. It's on our roadmap to go change that as well. But with the command line tool, you actually tell us which PHP runtime you want to bring to us, and we'll bundle it. You give us the PHP application, and you tell which PHP extensions you need. And we run it through the command line tool, which has a dependency on Windows Azure SDK. You need the Windows Azure SDK installed, and you get a cloud package and configuration. So let's go take a look at it. Actually, let me go through one more slide before we go. So you can use the command line tool for either creating a new application from scratch. Just don't specify a source project, and it'll create one for you. You can create. You can take an existing project and move it over using the command line tool. And the point is, you need no IDE for that. Okay, let's take a look at that quickly. Back to the demo machine. So this is the way the command line tool works. You specify. There's only a few options you need to specify. You need to specify a name for your project. You need to specify the source project if you have one. You need to specify where you want the output to go. If you don't tell us where to go, we'll just put it out in a temp directory, and we'll create a folder for you. And that's really it. You can specify alternatively. You can specify additionally if you want to run this thing in the development fabric or not. So the application I'm going to use today is an interesting one, at least to me. Okay. So have you heard about the OData protocol? Who heard about the OData protocol today? Almost all of you? Good. So Doug talked about it in the keynote, and there are a couple more sessions on it. There was a session on OData earlier today as well. Netflix took their data and made it available as an OData endpoint. So basically, you can go through the catalog of movies and all the stuff they have on their website and get an OData feed for it. So what we did was we created a PHP application that consumes that. It's a separate whole thing. I'm not going to talk about that application, but I'm going to use that application as my source and show how I can easily convert it over to a cloud application. The way I do that is I run PHP package.php. I give it the runtime, which is basically saying, use this PHP that's in c:/PHP. That's the PHP I want you to use. And c:/temp/Netflix demo is where my source code is. And I give a name called Flix, and I say I want to run it in the dev fabric. So when I do that, the tool goes through. It's basically doing exactly what the Eclipse IDE was doing, but now it's doing it from the command line. You have a little more control, and you can. And by the way, this is all in PHP. As you can see, it's package.php. As packaging service up, it will launch it in the browser. Okay. let's give it another minute. It should be done shortly. Okay, so it says it's done, and now it's deploying it in the dev fabric. Once it's deployed, it'll tell me where it is. It'll actually, in this case, I specified -u, so it'll actually launch the browser for me as well. So we have other things we want to do with this tool that are not available in the CDP today, but it's very functional already right now. Okay, so it brings up this and I can basically go through movies, seasons. I can search on a number of things. I have this application also deployed. This is running on my local host. I also have this deployed on right here. Same exact application on flix.cloudapp.net. That's another one of my Windows Azure projects, and I just deployed that before the session. So I can go in here. I can either do search by, I don't know, Africa. I don't know what will come up. But it comes up with a bunch of stuff, and then that's basically it. So I was able to take an existing application that uses, in this case, uses OData, but could be any PHP application, and just quickly migrate over using the Windows Azure command line tool. Last point I want to demo is we didn't talk about logging and diagnostics. One of the concerns most people have is, since once I deploy my application to the cloud, how am I going to have any instrumentation on it? And we have enabled the diagnostics features that you get with .NET in PHP as well, and that's included in the command line tool. And the way that this works is, you basically specify, we give you an API to do the logging, and then you specify how frequently you want these logs copied over to a blob store. Or actually, sorry, a table store in Windows Azure Storage. And then you can just read it off of your table store. You can do it as quickly, as at the frequency of every 30 seconds, or every 3 minutes, or every hour, whatever you decide to choose. And you basically decide what you want to log. So that's all available. And the way I can actually show you is if I go to click on movies, and if I click on seasons, on both those events, I'm actually writing code that does logging, and let me show you what that logging code looks like. Okay, so this was. Okay, so just let me go season start. So this is basically, that's all you have to do. You have multiple levels of logging at what verbosity you want. You want information, you want critical errors only, you want all sorts of different things. And you basically say what you want to log. It's really as simple as that, and you have logging enabled now. The only other thing would be to specify this in, once it's done converting to a Windows Azure project, you can in the CFG file you have, basically is there two XML lines that tell you how frequently you want to copy it over, and that's it. We can actually take a look at that as well in just a minute. If I can find where I didn't specify a target directory for this to output the Azure project, so it's going to tell me where it put it. So this is where it goes. It went to my user local temp, flex build /flex. So if I go there, I should be able to see my application. So here's the configuration that it output. I didn't mean to use Visual Studio, but that's the default program. So here you can see that I have multiple levels of logging, critical error information or anything, and I basically specify how frequently I want to transfer my logs to the database, to the Windows Azure table store. And that's it. I think that's really it. So let's move back to the slide deck. The other things I would have liked to talk about, I love App Fabric. App Fabric is my favorite piece in Windows Azure. It connects, the Service Bus connects applications together, lets you get to endpoints that are really hard to reach otherwise. They're behind a firewall or their IP address keeps changing. We have SDKs for that in PHP. I love the access control service too. Gives me claims-based claims-based authorization, and it lets me build claims-aware applications, and I love that. I shouldn't really call this a WCF Data Services PHP toolkit anymore, given it's OData now. It's the OData toolkit, and we use that toolkit to actually build the Netflix example. But that was all behind the scenes for the command line tool, but that's what we used to actually build that application. I didn't get a chance to talk about Windows Azure blobs and tables either, but I felt that was one of those things that's very easy to get your head around, and you get the Windows Azure PHP SDK and its tables and blobs. It's really easy to use. So I figured I'd focus more on giving some practical advice on moving other parts of the application over. And finally, you can get more information on windowsazure.com/interrupt. There's a comprehensive list of all the PHP-related Windows Azure projects. All of these projects are open source. Most of them are under a BSD-style license. A couple may be under MSPL, but I think most of them are under BSD. And you're welcome to use them as you wish. You can change the source code as you wish and make them yours. With that, quick recap. We looked at a quick introduction of Windows Azure. We looked at how to deploy an application, create a new application in Eclipse, how to convert an existing application, how to use PHP plus MySQL on the cloud, or move your application to SQL Azure and get that running in the cloud, and some tooling support from the command line. So call to action. We are building these tools, and as we build these tools, we are learning. We would like to know more about how you are using these tools, what scenarios they actually have helped you enable, and more importantly, what other scenarios you would like to enable that we can help with. That's very, very important to us. And like the command line tool, we didn't do that in the first place because we thought the Eclipse IDE was the primary use case. But the community told us otherwise. And, well, I shouldn't say otherwise, but also that the command line tool was very important. So we went ahead and built that. That's one example. But we're looking for your feedback. So please let us know. You can get a hold of. Well, these are some other talks on Windows Azure at MIX. The ones that have already happened, you can go watch the recordings. But there are two talks that are tomorrow. One, which I just mentioned earlier in my session, was SQL Azure with David Robinson. And then, that's wrong. Clemens is not talking about SQL Azure. Clemens is talking about the service bus. So that's a typo there on the slide. Yeah, his talk is tomorrow too. But you can get a hold of me and Craig. Craig, you want to raise your hand there? We'll be happy to help you directly if you have any questions. And we will post the code for everything I showed today on blogs.msdn.com/interoperability. Questions? Go ahead.
How much of this requires Windows?
How much of this requires Windows? Very good question. The Eclipse build is a Windows build that we're using, of course. But when you really get down to it, it's the command line tool. You think about it, there are two pieces. One is the deployment piece, and one is running the application and developing and running it in the dev fabric. That piece, definitely you're going to need Windows, because Windows is the closest you get to Windows Azure. So if you want your application to run on Windows Azure, you want to test it on Windows. The deployment piece, it's possible, theoretically, that you can run it by taking the dependency or the packaging dependency out from, we use CSPack, which comes with Windows Azure SDK to do the packaging. It's conceivable. It's an OPC convention, open packaging convention. It's a zip file, effectively. It's conceivable that you can build something like that on other platforms or using other languages as well, and get that to at least deploy. So right now you need Windows because we have a dependency on Windows Azure SDK. In the future, we or someone else may be able to enable at least the packaging piece. I can see a scenario where you develop your application on Windows, you checked everything into SVN, but you have a build machine on Linux where you want to get the package down, you want to run through a packaging process, and then upload it into a blob store as the endpoint where people are going to download or you're going to deploy to the cloud from. And it's conceivable you can do that without Windows. Any other questions? There was a question here? Well, Okay, I'll go again.
How about like URL handlers like Drupal, where everything goes through a single PHP file?
Correct. Watch this space. That's all I can say right now. There's more coming in the Drupal / WordPress, Joomla. We just watch this space. You had a question?
The SQL Azure, does it work the same way as SQL Server? I'm talking about the interfaces between PHP and the database. If you are using ORM, not directly SQL commands.
Sorry, can you speak a little louder? I'm not able to understand.
When you are using ORMs like Doctrine or Couple, I don't know if you know them, but you're not directly writing the SQL commands.
Mm-hmm.
I know that these libraries work with SQL Server. Is SQL Azure the same thing? Does SQL Azure work the same way that SQL Server?
So I'm still not able. Can anyone else follow that question? Sorry. Did you?
Well, I think the simple answer is in general.
Can you repeat the question, Craig?
Well, my question is there's other tools that work with SQL Server that you may not be familiar with.
Yes.
Will they interface the same way with SQL Azure?
Okay, so the question is, if you have, are there other tools that work with SQL Server, would they also work with SQL Azure? And so SQL Server and SQL Azure are similar. They're not exactly the same. So there may be differences. Somebody else wants to answer that?
So I'm a SQL Azure product manager, so I'll add something. But there is, from tools and programming language perspective, there's a complete symmetry. So all the tools that we have on SQL Server on premises, either they are already been supporting SQL Azure, or we are working through the roadmap to make sure that each of those tools are supporting and working with SQL Azure. From the programming model perspective, everything 2008 onwards, the features, we are making sure that all the symmetry shows up even from the feature perspective in SQL Azure.
All right, folks. Thanks for attending, and hope you're able to put this into use. So one last question we'll take here.
Is the Windows Azure for Eclipse website the best place to get more information, or is that
So if you go to, that's our blog. The previous slide actually mentioned, a couple slides earlier we mentioned interoperabilitybridges.com. That's a catalog of all the interop bridges we built. That's not specific to Windows Azure, but if you go to, there's a tag for Azure and you can filter by Azure. That said, azure.com/interop will point you directly to just the Azure-related stuff. And for the Eclipse project in particular, it will point you to go to the Windows Azure for Eclipse website. And there's actually a Windows Azure for e.org/learn. And we have several tutorials there to learn.
Is there a way to launch commands and contact on Windows Azure?
Is there a way to run to run shell scripts on Windows Azure platform?
Yes, to run commands, something right use right obvious keys, for example, to run task technology emails.
Yes. Yes. The question is there, if I understand correctly, what you're asking is there a way for you to run shell scripts or command line on once your code is running in the Azure platform itself? There are two ways to think about it. One is what your worker role can shell out and do. Another way is, can you get a physical window that you can look at, like a telnet session, and into your Windows Azure machine? Not directly, but there are. In fact, the MySQL Solution Accelerator has an instance manager tool that actually inside a web page will give you a console prompt to your Windows Azure, and you can go type in command scripts from there. But also watch the space. More coming there. All right, guys. Thanks, guys. I think we're just right on time. So thanks for attending. And if you have any other business questions, you can ask Craig later after the session. Thank you.